Manitoba Premier Wab Canoe says a search will continue at a Winnipeg-area landfill for the remains of two murder victims. Partial remains of both Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris have been confirmed at the landfill. When speaking to the press, Mr. Canoe said, quote, "At the end of the day, we did the right thing. We did right by these families, and we are bringing their loved ones home."
Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris are coming home. This is what we set out to do. I don't know if many of us knew the odds of success. I certainly was always trying to keep a realistic perspective, but it turns out bringing them home was within our grasp and something we were able to do for these families. And as we reflect on this whole experience, from the first times we spoke about it publicly, through all the ups and downs, to now having the news that Mercedes and Morgan are going to be coming home to their families, I hope that Manitobans and Canadians believe that this reflects positively on our province and on our country. We went through a whole heck of a lot to get to this point, but at the end of the day, we did the right thing. We did right by these families, and we are bringing their loved ones home. It's all right to share that we continue to find remains and other things that are significant potentially. So we're going to continue the search effort, and at some point, probably in the near future, we'll have that conversation with the families about when we move on to the next steps.
A search of the landfill began in December after the women's families, Indigenous leaders, and advocates pushed for years for a search of the area. The Globe and Mail's Temur Durrani joined us earlier for more on the announcement.
We've gotten to know each other a lot, all of the reporters and everybody really with the family, right, that were there throughout that time. And in the conversations we've had since, they're still processing this. It's only been a few hours since they learned about this, right? They weren't expecting any of this to happen yet. They weren't expecting this kind of good news to come out so quickly. I mean, the province had really prepared everyone to really have the search go on for at least all of this year and well into next year. So to be able to find human remains at all was a pretty big deal. But then to also identify that the human remains that they found, the two different sets at least, are of these two women. So Mercedes' family and Morgan's family, both of these families are really still processing this news. At the moment, one thing they are doing is they're trying to find any further remains of these two women specifically, so Morgan and Mercedes. If there's anything else out there, that would kind of create another whole set of issues, so they're going to kind of come to that when that happens, or if that happens. But right now, it's almost been a sort of natural course of saying, yeah, these women were there, so throughout all of this, there's been this kind of, it's a big idea to move, quite literally, they had to move a mountain from one part of an area over this mound of this area, and then sift through it manually and find that. Now what we're seeing is that was all the right thing to do. These millions of dollars that they spent on this was the right thing to do, because it was always something that the women's families have been questioned about, that even the premier was questioned about. I mean, we've had governments before, we've had the police here before who have said that this was unfeasible, that this would have been too dangerous or costly. And it's been shown that that was not the case. It's been less than 3 months, and here we are. There's definitive proof to say that this actually was out there. These women were out there.
We also asked Temur about the extent of Mr. Canoe's involvement in the findings and the significance of his goal to bring the family's loved ones home.
It was everything to the search. It's meant everything to the families. Whether I don't think this issue, and Mr. Canoe's been very clear on this issue should have never become a political thing. It was a criminal case, and then it turned into a political issue because the past PC government, they started putting up billboards, newspaper spots that they were buying, radio ads that they were putting up in the election in 2023. In that fall, they were all around the province. You could see this thing, and around the country, around the world, people were watching a sitting government at the time telling people that if you vote for us, we will not do this search for these women's families. And Mr. Canoe, he said that this was the humane thing to do, that this was the humanitarian thing to do. That's what made it that flashpoint issue in the election. But since then, he's made it clear it should have never entered into partisan politics. And the families have been cleared on that too. They've been dragged along with that. They wanted, whichever government was there, for them to search for this, right? Because if your sister, my daughter, someone else out there goes missing in Canada, we should go looking for them, especially in a case like this where they, now we found that they were murdered, that these were at the hands of a serial killer. So at this point, I think, the PCs have apologized, but the families keep telling me that those apologies have not actually come to them directly. So the progressive conservatives in the House actually, in fact, went up and said, what we did was wrong. We didn't lead with empathy. We didn't consider closure. We wanted to move forward with prosecution or think about it that way, but we didn't do the search for that reason. And now they're apologizing. But again, the families feel that that's disingenuous. These words never came to them before. And they, in fact, actually even now have not come to them directly before they get presented to the rest of the world.
He also touched on what the reaction has been from the Indigenous community in Manitoba since the remains were discovered.
I think at this point, everybody, and I want to sort of go back to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, which the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs is an organization here in Manitoba that represents 63 First Nations. So those are all the 63 First Nations here in the province. And the Grand Chief of that, she actually passed away right before any of this could have happened last year. So in September, Grand Chief Kathy Merrick, who's the first woman to lie in state here in Manitoba, given that honor last year, she suddenly passed away quite literally on the steps of the court, arguing once again for Indigenous people's rights. And she had been the fiercest advocate throughout this whole process from 2022 with the women's families to say this needed to be done. So when she died, her husband told Mr. Canoe, and this is something they've all shared with me over and over again, that this was the legacy of her work, right? And but she would have, if she was here today, this would have been everything to her, because this was all she'd wanted for these women's families to be able to get this closure and move on. And this idea that she gets to have a funeral, a dignified funeral that all of us deserve, allows us to sort of show everyone out there that you cannot get away with these things, that if you do something like this to another First Nations woman, to another Indigenous woman, you cannot get away with this in Canada. You can't keep getting away with it without us not treating them like any other human being.